Nicholas Harrington tightened his scarf against the crisp winter chill as he guided his son, Elliot, through the bustling Christmas market. The air was thick with the smell of roasted chestnuts, sweet gingerbread, and the sharp tang of mulled wine. Strings of twinkling lights crisscrossed above the cobblestone paths, creating a magical canopy that sparkled against the falling snow. It was the perfect December evening, one Nicholas had planned meticulously to bring some holiday cheer to their otherwise routine lives. Elliot, a bright-eyed boy with an unruly mop of brown hair, tugged at his father's hand. "Dad, look! A carousel!" he exclaimed, his voice bursting with excitement. Nicholas smiled, his heart swelling at the sight of his son's joy. Moments like these reminded him of the precious bond they shared. It wasn't always easy being a single father, but Nicholas did his best to make sure Elliot felt loved and supported. "All right, let's check it out," Nicholas said, allowing Elliot to lead the way. As they approached the carousel, Nicholas took a moment to admire the intricate hand-painted horses and the gilded mirrors reflecting the market's festive glow. Elliot climbed aboard eagerly, choosing a white horse with a golden mane. Nicholas watched from the side, waving each time his son passed by, his laughter mingling with the cheerful Christmas music. When the ride ended, Elliot bounded off the carousel and darted toward a nearby stall selling handmade ornaments. Nicholas followed at a leisurely pace, his gaze wandering over the vibrant market. Families bustled from stall to stall, couples huddled close under blankets, and children clutched steaming mugs of hot cocoa. It was a scene straight out of a holiday postcard. "Dad, can we get this one?" Elliot asked, holding up a delicate glass ornament shaped like a snowflake. "Of course," Nicholas replied, reaching for his wallet. "It'll look perfect on the tree." As they finalized the purchase, Nicholas noticed a boy standing near the edge of the stall. He was dressed in a worn blue coat and a knitted beanie that looked handmade. What struck Nicholas wasn't the boy's modest appearance but his uncanny resemblance to Elliot. The same chestnut hair, the same almond-shaped eyes, even the same curious tilt of the head as he examined a wooden toy soldier on display. Nicholas blinked, convinced his eyes were playing tricks on him. "Elliot," he called, his voice steady despite the sudden thrum of his pulse. "Come here for a second." Elliot approached, clutching the ornament in his small hands. "What is it, Dad?" Nicholas gestured subtly toward the other boy. "Do you see him? Over there." Elliot squinted, then his eyes widened. "He looks just like me," he whispered, his tone a mix of amazement and excitement. Before Nicholas could stop him, Elliot walked up to the boy. "Hi," Elliot said. "I'm Elliot. What's your name?" The boy turned, his expression cautious. "Leo," he said quietly. Nicholas stepped closer, his curiosity growing with every second. "Hello, Leo," he said gently. "Are you here with your parents?" Leo hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. A woman emerged from behind the stall, her face pale and her eyes darting nervously between Nicholas and Elliot. She looked about Nicholas's age, with a haggard but kind face framed by dark hair tucked into a scarf. "Leo, it's time to go," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "But, Mom," Leo protested. "He looks just like me." The woman froze, her grip tightening on Leo's shoulder. Her gaze flicked to Nicholas, then to Elliot, and back again. Nicholas saw the color drain from her face, and her expression shifted from confusion to fear. She pulled Leo closer, almost protectively. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "We have to go." "Wait," Nicholas said, taking a step forward. "I don't mean to intrude, but please," she interrupted, her tone pleading. "Just let us go." She turned and hurried away, pulling Leo with her. The boy glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes locking with Elliot's one last time before disappearing into the crowd. Nicholas stood frozen, his mind racing. The resemblance between the two boys was undeniable. It wasn't just their physical appearance, it was the way they moved, the way they tilted their heads when curious. It was as if he had seen a ghost of Elliot. "Dad," Elliot said, tugging at Nicholas's sleeve. "Why did they leave? Do you think he's my twin or something?" Nicholas crouched down to meet Elliot's gaze. I don't know, buddy. But maybe. Elliot's eyes lit up with a mixture of wonder and determination. We have to find him again. If he's my brother, we can't just let him go. Nicholas nodded, though he wasn't sure what to make of this situation himself. The logical part of his brain told him it was a coincidence, a strange but explainable occurrence. But another part, the part that clung to the photograph he had kept in his study for years, whispered that there was more to this than chance. As they continued through the market, Nicholas couldn't shake the image of Leo and the woman from his mind. He replayed the encounter, analyzing every detail. The way the woman had looked at him, fearful, almost guilty. The way she had clung to Leo as if protecting him from something, or someone. Dad, are we going to look for them? Elliot asked as they passed the stalls selling candied apples. Nicholas hesitated, then nodded. Yes, we will. But let's be smart about it, okay? We'll keep an eye out, but we won't make a scene. Elliot grinned, his excitement bubbling over. For him, it was an adventure, a chance to solve a mystery and maybe, just maybe, find a long-lost brother. They walked through the market, scanning the crowd for any sign of Leo or the woman. Nicholas's heart pounded with anticipation and unease. He couldn't explain it, but he felt like he was on the brink of uncovering something life-changing. As they rounded a corner, Nicholas spotted something on the ground near a bench. It was a small, weathered photograph. He picked it up, his breath catching in his throat. The image was faded, but the details were unmistakable. A woman holding two infants, their tiny faces peeking out from swaddling blankets. The woman in the photograph was his late wife. Nicholas's hands trembled as he stared at the photo. His mind raced with questions. How could this be? Who was the woman with Leo? And why did she have a photograph of his wife with two babies? Dad? Elliot's voice pulled him back to the present. What is it? Nicholas crouched down, showing him the photo. This is your mother, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And those are two babies. One of them is you, but the other. Elliot's eyes widened. Leo, he whispered. Nicholas nodded, his resolve hardening. We're going to find them, he said. We're going to get answers. The snow continued to fall softly as father and son stood together, the photograph clutched tightly in Nicholas's hand. The festive cheer of the Christmas market seemed distant now, overshadowed by the weight of the mystery they had stumbled upon, a mystery that could change their lives forever. Nicholas sat at his desk late into the night, the photograph spread before him under the warm glow of his study lamp. His heart was a storm of emotions, confusion, hope, and a gnawing fear that the life he had built for Elliot was somehow incomplete. He traced the faded edges of the picture, his finger lingering over the tiny faces of the two babies. One was undoubtedly Elliot, but the other. He turned the photograph over. The back was blank save for a faint indentation, as if someone had once written something but later erased it. This clue, however small, only deepened the mystery. Who was the woman who had Leo? How did she come to possess this photo? And most importantly, why had Nicholas never known about a second child? The next morning, Nicholas dropped Elliot off at school, reassuring his son that he would continue looking for Leo. Elliot clung to his father's words, his wide eyes filled with an eager trust that Nicholas couldn't bear to disappoint. As soon as he left the school gates, Nicholas drove straight to the Christmas market, hoping to find a lead. The market was less crowded in the morning, its stalls opening slowly as vendors prepared for the day. Nicholas approached the stall where he had first seen Leo. The vendor, an older man with a wiry frame, looked up from arranging ornaments. "Excuse me," Nicholas said, pulling out the photograph. "Do you remember seeing this woman and this boy yesterday? They were at your stall." The vendor squinted at the image and nodded. "Yeah, I remember them. The boy wanted that wooden toy soldier. His mother didn't stay long, though. Seemed anxious, like she was in a hurry. Did she say where she was from?" Nicholas pressed, trying to keep the urgency out of his voice. The man scratched his head. "No, but I've seen her before. Lives in that little town a few miles west, Willowbrook, I think. You might want to start there." Nicholas thanked him and headed straight to Willowbrook, his pulse quickening with each mile. The town was small, its streets lined with modest houses and a few local shops. It didn't take long for him to find someone who recognized the woman from the photograph. Her name was Margaret, and she lived on the edge of town in a small, weathered house. Parking his car across the street, Nicholas sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he knew he couldn't leave without answers. The house was modest but well kept, with a small garden out front and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. Nicholas approached the door and knocked. Moments later, the door opened a crack, and Margaret's wary eyes appeared. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice guarded. Nicholas held up the photograph. "I believe you can. My name is Nicholas Harrington. I saw you and your son at the Christmas market yesterday, and I need to understand why you have this picture." Margaret's face paled, and for a moment, Nicholas thought she might slam the door. Instead, she opened it wider, motioning for him to come in. The living room was simple but cozy, with mismatched furniture and a faint scent of lavender. Leo was nowhere in sight. "Where's the boy?" Nicholas asked, his tone soft but firm. "He's at school," Margaret replied, her hands trembling as she gestured for him to sit. She remained standing, clutching the back of a chair for support. "Please," Nicholas began. "I'm not here to cause trouble. But that boy, Leo, looks exactly like my son, Elliot. And this photograph, it's of my late wife and 2 babies. I need to know what's going on." Margaret took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with tears. "I was hoping this day would never come," she said, her voice breaking. "But I suppose you deserve the truth." She sat down, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "Your wife, Lily, gave birth to twins, Elliot and Leo. I was there the day they were born. I was her nurse." Nicholas froze, his breath catching in his throat. Twins. His mind reeled at the revelation, the missing pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Margaret continued. "A few weeks after the boys were born, Lily came to me in a panic. She said she was being threatened by someone who wanted to hurt her and her children. I didn't know all the details, but she was desperate. She begged me to take one of the boys and keep him safe. She believed if they were separated, it would be harder for anyone to find them both." Nicholas felt a surge of anger and disbelief. "Why didn't she tell me any of this? I could have protected them, protected her." Margaret shook her head. "She thought she was protecting you by keeping you in the dark. She didn't want to put you in danger. A few days later she disappeared. I never saw her again." Nicholas's fists clenched at his sides, his mind racing with questions. "And you just took Leo? Raised him as your own?" Margaret met his gaze, her eyes pleading. "At first, it was just to keep him safe. But over time, he became my son. I didn't mean to deceive you, Mr. Harrington. I loved him, and I couldn't bear to let him go." The room fell silent, the weight of her confession settling between them. Nicholas leaned back, his anger giving way to a deep, aching sorrow. He had spent years mourning Lily, never knowing the full extent of her sacrifice. And all this time, Elliot had a brother he had been robbed of. "I need to see him," Nicholas said finally. "Leo deserves to know the truth. And so does Elliot." Margaret hesitated, her face crumpling with emotion. "I don't want to lose him," she whispered. "He's all I have." "You won't lose him," Nicholas said, his voice softening. "But they're brothers, Margaret. They have a right to be together." Margaret nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'll bring him home after school. But please promise me you'll be gentle. He's a sensitive boy, and this will turn his world upside down." Nicholas agreed, though he couldn't shake the knot of tension in his chest. When Leo arrived home later that afternoon, he was visibly wary of Nicholas, his small frame tense as he clung to Margaret's side. "Leo," Nicholas said gently, kneeling to the boy's level. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I want you to know something very important. You have a brother. His name is Elliot, and he's been waiting his whole life to meet you. Leo's eyes widened, confusion and curiosity battling within him. A brother? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Nicholas said. And he looks just like you. Leo turned to Margaret, searching her face for confirmation. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. It's true, sweetheart. And I think it's time you met him. Leo's grip on Margaret's hand tightened. But I don't want to leave you. You don't have to leave me, Margaret said, her voice trembling. But I think you'll find there's room in your heart for both of us. As the weight of her words sank in, Leo's expression softened. He glanced back at Nicholas, his eyes full of uncertainty but also a spark of hope. And in that moment, Nicholas knew that while the road ahead would be complicated, it was a path worth taking, for Elliot, for Leo, and for the family they were about to rebuild. Nicholas spent the next few days preparing for what he hoped would be a Christmas neither Elliot nor Leo would ever forget. He decorated the house with more care than he had in years, stringing lights around the windows and setting up a massive tree in the living room, its branches heavy with ornaments both new and old. Beneath the tree, he placed gifts carefully chosen for each boy, presents meant to reflect their individuality and the life they might now share. The night before Christmas Eve, Nicholas sat Elliot down to explain what was about to happen. He wasn't sure how a 7-year-old would process the idea of a long-lost twin, but Elliot surprised him. So, Leo's really my brother? Elliot asked, his voice filled with wonder. Yes, Nicholas said gently. You were born together, but for reasons I didn't know until now, you've been apart all this time. Elliot's face lit up. Does that mean I get to meet him? For real? Nicholas nodded. Tomorrow night. I've invited him and Margaret here for Christmas Eve dinner. But Elliot, this might be a little overwhelming for Leo. He's just learning the truth, and it's a lot to take in. Be patient with him, okay? I will, Elliot said solemnly. Then, after a pause, he grinned. I can't wait to show him my room. Do you think he likes dinosaurs? Nicholas laughed, feeling some of the tension ease from his chest. You'll have to ask him yourself. The following evening, Nicholas found himself pacing the foyer, glancing at the clock every few minutes. Elliot stood beside him, practically vibrating with anticipation. Finally, headlights appeared in the driveway, and Nicholas opened the door to see Margaret and Leo stepping out of a modest sedan. Leo clung to Margaret's hand, his expression nervous but curious as he took in the grand house. Welcome, Nicholas said warmly, stepping aside to let them in. We're so glad you could come. Margaret smiled, though it was strained. Thank you for inviting us. Elliot couldn't contain himself any longer. Leo, he exclaimed, running up to his brother. I'm Elliot. I've been waiting to meet you forever. Leo took a small step back, glancing at Margaret for reassurance. She nodded, and he hesitantly let go of her hand. Hi, he said softly. I'm Leo. The two boys stood there for a moment, staring at each other, as if trying to make sense of the reflection they saw in one another. Then, slowly, a smile spread across Leo's face. You really do look like me, he said. And you look like me, Elliot replied, laughing. Nicholas watched them, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and relief. It was an awkward start, but it was a start nonetheless. Dinner was a quiet affair at first, the room filled with the clinking of utensils and the soft hum of Christmas music in the background. Nicholas tried to make conversation, asking Leo about his favorite hobbies and what he liked about school. Elliot chimed in eagerly, trying to find common ground with his newfound brother. Do you like dinosaurs? Elliot asked, his eyes wide with hope. Leo nodded. Yeah. I have a book about them. Me too. My favorite is the T-Rex. What's yours? Leo hesitated, then smiled. I like the Triceratops. Cool. We can play dinosaurs after dinner, Elliot declared. Leo glanced at Margaret, who gave him a reassuring smile. Okay, he said quietly, and Elliot beamed. As the evening went on, the boys began to relax around each other. Elliot's boundless enthusiasm seemed to draw Leo out of his shell, and by the time dessert was served, they were giggling over a shared joke about how much whipped cream Elliot had piled onto his pie. After the boys had gone off to play, Nicholas and Margaret sat by the fire with cups of coffee. The room was quiet now, save for the distant sound of Elliot and Leo's laughter. "Thank you," Nicholas said after a long silence. "For coming tonight. For letting Leo be here." Margaret nodded, staring into the flames. "I wasn't sure if this was the right thing to do. But seeing them together, it feels right." Nicholas hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on his mind. "Do you regret it? Taking him in, I mean." Margaret looked at him sharply. "Never. I've loved Leo like he was my own from the moment I held him. But I do regret the lies. He deserved to know the truth. So did you." Her honesty disarmed Nicholas, and the anger he had been holding on to began to ebb away. "I was furious at first," he admitted. "But I've been thinking a lot about what Lily must have been going through. She must have trusted you more than anyone to leave Leo in your care." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "She did. And I promised her I would keep him safe. But now that he's met you and Elliot, I realize I've been keeping him from something just as important, his family." Nicholas reached out and placed a hand on her arm. "You are his family, Margaret. That won't change. But I hope we can find a way to be a family together." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'd like that." On Christmas morning, Nicholas was woken early by the sound of excited whispers. He found Elliot and Leo sitting under the tree, surrounded by a sea of wrapping paper. Each boy held a gift, their faces glowing with delight. "Look, Dad," Elliot said, holding up a model dinosaur set. "Leo got one too. Now we can play together." Nicholas smiled, his chest tightening with emotion. "Merry Christmas, boys." "Merry Christmas," they chorused. Margaret appeared in the doorway, a cup of coffee in hand. She watched the boys with a soft smile, and when her gaze met Nicholas's, it was filled with gratitude. Later that morning, the family gathered to decorate the Christmas tree. The boys took turns hanging ornaments, laughing as they tried to find the perfect spots. Margaret joined in, helping them reach the higher branches, while Nicholas stood back and took it all in. The house, once so quiet and orderly, was now alive with laughter and warmth. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges to face, but for the first time in years, Nicholas felt whole. As the final ornament was placed on the tree, snow began to fall outside, blanketing the world in a soft, shimmering white. The boys pressed their faces to the window, marveling at the wintry scene. "Dad, can we go play in the snow?" Elliot asked. "Please?" Leo added, his voice shy but hopeful. Nicholas grinned. "Go get your coats." The boys dashed off, leaving Nicholas and Margaret alone by the tree. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Margaret broke the silence. "This is how it should be," she said softly. "For both of them." Nicholas nodded. "For all of us." And as the boys' laughter echoed through the house, Nicholas knew they had found not just a family, but a future filled with hope and love.